an exercise now because I think like the rest of this event, it's very non-directive. It's about exploring different perspectives we have on this, different ideas we have for doing things. But I guess you know, one of the ideas where perhaps the big society ideas overlap with work in community development and other fields is kind of making the most of what we've got in communities or the networks or organisations that we work in. And I was hearing in some of the conversations perhaps that because funding has been easier over the last 10 years than perhaps before, we started looking more at those resources and perhaps less at making the most of what we had, although lots of people are obviously doing that as well. And I wondered whether, in terms of thinking about a network, support network, mutual support network, whatever, we could reflect on that, the immense amount of enthusiasm and skill and hope and ideas that we have in this network, and even more if we, as quite a lot of us were saying, how do we get out of the tight networks which we've been in and reach out to other networks in other sectors and other places. So how do we actually do that? And I guess the people in this room, I'm sure, who've got expertise in doing that in local communities, appreciative inquiry and local asset mapping and thinking total place and all of these kind of methodologies which have been around for some time. But how might we do that together? How might we understand what we've got in this room and the connections we've got with other people, and to explore, wouldn't it be great if we could actually connect with those people over there? So the structure of the assets that we've got, but secondly, as a lot of this reflected, how do we actually communicate with people? How do we get out of the jargon? How do we speak plainly? How do we have conversations in our networking in the same way we have in you know, our private lives and our families and so on and so forth? So we can draw maps of networks, but we also need to think about the ways in which those networks become animated, partly face-to-face, partly online. So I think one of the ideas of this as not a launch event, but a co-design event to explore how this might move forward, was to think about how we might do that. But who's done network stuff wherever before? Locally or, yeah? Yeah, or locally or...
networking. Who's done networking?
Yeah, who's actually thought about, in a community, how do we understand better the connections in that community, the assets that we've got that may not be realised, how do we do the network building?
Could I make a wee bit of a distinction between networking, which is actually going out and doing it, having your own list of contacts and going out there and having conversations, sharing information, etc. And understanding the network, because I think that's different. I mean, in what we've been doing, we've actually been splitting down people concerned with networks into almost 3 different roles. You know, there's the networker who's out there doing it. There's a network builder who is actually, you know, understands perhaps the wider network and says, that guy over there should actually be talking to that woman over there. Right? So you're trying to put the connections together. You know, a wider overview. Right? And that's really, I suppose, what a lot of what's happening today. But there's a sort of third role, which is the what you might call the network analyst, who has a much broader picture. We have actually tried to do this with the big society down south, and we also tried to run an event here where we can map the network and analyse it and say who's most separate. And one of the things that I think we have to say is that both in the big society map we did down south and in the one we did here, the groups are incredibly disconnected. You know, there's actually very little connection. I mean, if you compare that network with, say, a national organisation or a set of government bodies, they're very unconnected. So if you're trying to make a difference, how do we actually get that connection?
And I think it's fair to say you can't understand the network if you can't draw it, basically. So unless you can draw the connections between people, who knows who who's talking to who, where do people find out stuff. There isn't a way of actually understanding that network. Once you start drawing those connections, you'll begin to see whether it's a kind of hub and spokes affair, whether it's a mesh of lots of different kinds of connections, whether some people have got lots of connections coming in, and some people are out there isolated, and so on. And I think that analysis has some practical uses, because you can begin to see where you might like to make some more connections. I don't know, Drew, whether we want to, well, I mean, again, any reflection on that? Is that connecting with anybody? And practically, in terms of our society, I think it's always a bit easier. I think this will not happen without a society. A bunch of people go, we need to network better. We'll have some meetings, we'll set up an online network and so on. People come to it, other people with resources say, oh, that's really interesting, can we help you do that? And what happens is the people in the middle get all the money and the jobs and the connections and so on and so forth. The people outside get a bit cheesed off and the thing kind of collapses. So if we wanted our society to become an open, inclusive kind of network which connects across to people not just like us but other people that we would like to meet, how do we do that?
Can I have a reflection on networks and the type of network?
Yeah.
I might want to be able to find my way through a wood and to be able to do that quite effectively. Other people might want a motorway. And I think when we're talking about a network, some people want motorways and some people want to find their way through the woods. And I don't want to problematise it, but I think that assuming that we all mean the same thing by a network is not helpful. Because I don't want to scale up to big government.
I think there's huge confusion about the way people use the word network. It's a catch-all word that we all use. If you ask an organisation, you know, people will tell you, we've got this big network. What it means is we've got a list. You don't have a network at all. You don't know what the connections are beyond their own contacts. On a whole number of both community and other organisations that we've worked with, where we've mapped the networks, it's allowed them to see beyond their initial set of contacts and say, wait a minute, we should probably be connected with them up there. Didn't know about them. Yeah. There's a lot of work at the moment on the effects, you know, network effects on things like smoking, obesity, all that kind of stuff. You know, and the way that the actual characteristics of the network will affect the way that people behave within it. I don't want to be all theoretical about it, but it's not just a way of making contact. It's a way of influencing and actually trying to get stuff done.
That's an effective network.
Yeah. Sorry?
That's an efficient network.
Yeah, okay.
Can
well, there's plenty
I
of
just give an illustration that might or might not be helpful? It was something I was going to say earlier on, and didn't have to. So I was going to talk about knitting, because I know that you're all quite keen on that. There are people who are into knitting, often members of an online network, which is called Ravelry. Ravelry's got about 1 million members worldwide, and it is a very, very efficient and effective network because it works by people exchanging information that they need when they need it about stuff where they have mutual interest. And so, in terms of thinking about us as being a network rather than a hierarchy, you know, Ravelry or other examples of similar networks I think what we need to be trying to learn from, because it's actually they work very, very effectively with people helping each other, giving each other advice free of charge. It's not commercialised. There are opportunities there for them to exchange advice, to sell to each other if they want to. But it's basically a network of people who share a common interest and are looking for ways to help each other achieve what they want to achieve as effectively as possible. So in terms of thinking about what's helpful in our networks, you know, what are the networks that help us do what we want to do? You know, and how if the networks that we're involved in don't help us do what we want to do, how do they need to change in order to be more effective?
One of the things that I found quite relaxing about coming here is the fact that I didn't really see I didn't know what it was that we intended to do at the end, and I think that was quite deliberate, that idea of, you know, not having a particular endpoint. I didn't think I was massively task-focused, quite task-focused, but not massively so. But I'm discovering that I keep trying to think to myself, what is the end point I'm doing? If somebody went, if I went back to, say, any networks I had tonight, maybe, you know, I don't know, I'm the school governor or something like that, and told them what I was doing, I'd still be a little bit unsure what it was I was doing. And I don't want to try and put, you know, parameters on it, but I might just after it for the sake of my own head. Is this, because presumably we're not intending to all do something together mutually, or maybe we are. Is this about how we develop some sort of big society idea better in our existing networks, and we can use this network as a support for that? Is that?
Yeah, it's I guess it's how can we find more effective ways of helping each other do the things that we want to do where we are.
Right, okay. Sorry,
so that we can learn from each other's experiences, we can share stories, we can get support where we need it, we can help other people who are maybe starting out on similar projects or journeys to the ones that we're on.
I think I find it quite difficult because your analogy is helpful, but those people are all interested in knitting. And I've got no idea what the people in this room are interested in, really, actually. And I think that's what I'm struggling with. I've got quite a lot of networks with different things. And some of them are connected, and some of them aren't, and I would never expect them to be connected. You know, I don't expect the network I've got around my daughter's school to be connected with the professional housing network, you know, I just don't expect them to be. But, so I am struggling to know what it is what the problem is. I don't mean what the problem is, I mean what would be the focus, what would be the topics that we would all share a mutual interest in? Because I think there's, somebody mentioned earlier, you know, there are some differences in terms of perspective. Yeah. And it would be interesting to know what is the common thread that's going to hold us together.
Yeah.
Is it one of the things that I see it as what I'd like to take on it is we all know how to do certain stuff, and that's the common thing. We can share that. Doesn't matter what the communities or neighbourhoods, what if there's an issue, problem, whatever that is, we can kind of like offer support in ensuring that gets done. Yeah. It doesn't have to be one particular problem, and because it's all so local, it's always going to be different. Is that?
Well, except for some people it might not be local, it might be other than, it might be global, you know.
But then we've still got people willing to share experience.
Yeah, and okay, so I suppose I'm just sharing with Alison a confusion about where the focus is.
Would it not? I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge, a huge wealth of knowledge amongst you all. Would it not be better to have some type of forum on the page where, you know, if you've got a problem, you know, if you've got a problem, you know someone's got a problem with something, you can post it on there, and everybody in this room and your extended network can take a look at it, and maybe somebody else has got the answer to your problem, or knows some organisation somewhere else that's done it. I mean, I'm just one example, a community enterprise type thing that was going on in Dewsbury that I met around a football club that needed changing rooms. I actually spoke to someone in Fagley who they turn over 100,000 a year through their community type thing for football. You know, would it not be better to exchange that information? You know, because the guy's going to give you it free of charge. So the knowledge is there. It's just a case of sharing it.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's quite helpful. I think that's, I guess if our starting point is people who are interested in or involved in community action at a local level, and how do we make that work better, given that a lot of the infrastructure that is supporting that is disappearing. Maybe that is the starting point for thinking about how we can create an effective network. Yeah.
A couple of things I think about networking. One is about conflicting networks. I mean, in the area where I live in South Sheffield, it's extremely multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith. There are lots of networks and they're all fighting each other. There is no way on God's earth that they are ever going to find commonality about anything, I think, frankly. You know, because you know there are the networks that drop the litter and there are networks that want the litter picked up. All the rest of it. That's one thing. Second thing is the exclusivity of networks of people in power. You know, fine for me to start a Facebook page or something for my local network, but actually the power is networking at the golf club, you know, or in the Masons Hall or somewhere, and there's no, you know, I have no access to that network, but that's where they, you know, they will come out and they'll say all the things that I want to hear, and they'll go back and make decisions that are completely different. The other thing is, I'm networked out. I'm a member of so many networks, and I only keep up with about 3 of them now because I just don't have the time. The last thing we need is another network, I fear.
To create a network around our society is only useful if people find use in it. Yeah, I mean, let's be frank. And the point of this meeting is to explore whether people will find that of use. And I think what's going to happen is probably some of you here will say, yeah, great, we'll get involved. And some of you will say it's not for me, and that's okay.
Well, I mean, I think it is for me. I just don't have the capacity. Yeah. That's the tragedy of it.
Really what we're trying to explore, and deliberately going about it quite gently, and not presenting you with a blueprint or a way of doing it, because it does have to come from you, is where are the areas where it's going to be useful and helpful for us to build connections, and what sort of issues do we want to build those connections around. And David, did you want to come back?
I guess I'm getting the sense of there have been support networks in the past which are being reduced because staffing is being cut and so on and so forth. How important and useful have those been, or in what ways have they been most useful? If, like many of us are, we're kind of overwhelmed by connections and networks and so on and so forth, but at the same time, we say we're not helping people in local communities share experience most effectively and learn from each other. Is it try harder time, or is it do things differently time? So where perhaps have we variously found, gosh, that's really helped me connect better, people are really sharing differently. I mean, I'll say on the internet, because that's where I work. I think the ways in which people are setting up, whether it's local radio or local blogging or local online communities or whatever, are offering new ways to share things. You know, I would say, wouldn't I, that using Twitter and other media and so forth is allowing me to connect with all sorts of people that I couldn't have done before. But that's my particular enthusiasm. People go to events, but you can easily get evented out. All the sorts of there won't necessarily be funding around to go to those events. So, if we believe that sharing stuff is really important in order to learn, how do we share stuff, and how do we help other people share stuff in the most effective way? Or is that not the problem? Do we not have a problem?
Yeah, I guess a lot of people in this room are sort of practitioners in community organisations. Me and I know a few other people in the room are coming from sort of consultancy, think tank side of things. And just from a personal perspective, in terms of what I find useful, people working in my line of work find useful, my organisation, we want to learn about what community groups are doing and to kind of understand better and research best practice, particularly in community groups that are working on environmental issues. So one thing that I find useful from the network and from a website that was kind of a host of the network would be almost perhaps a kind of database of different network members and the kind of work they're doing, and that can kind of showcase exactly what work's being done and in what kind of areas different organisations are working. That would be one thing I think would be useful, just as a practical suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're hoping to start, and we've only just about got it working on the Society forum, is a map of projects that people find inspiring, or which they're either involved in or have knowledge of, and so we're hoping to get people to just add information and links to a simple Google map to start building up that.
And it's kind of a sort of practical resource.
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful.
Similarly, there's if you go to the Society forum, you find that there's if you want to kind of add information about stuff that you're doing, there's a form that you can complete there for just a brief description of your project or your idea or something that you know about. And again, we just have to build this up at the rate that people are interested in adding to it, and if people aren't that interested, then obviously they won't do it and it won't be useful. But so we're testing out really some of these opportunities and see whether there is whether there's a need and an interest in developing them.
We're not making any difference, and we're not differentiating between people's paid projects or paid work that they're doing. We don't need to make that differential.
No, I don't see why you should, but obviously we just need to bear in mind that probably the paid stuff is going to decrease and the unpaid stuff is either going to increase or not get done.
I'd actually like to pay people to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't, I'm not expecting to get stuff for free. I think sometimes I want to get over the initial hurdle that I've got, get the thing in motion, and then pay someone to do it. Rather than have to do it all myself. Because I've often said, in most places I go, I'm completely ignorant. I know about the bit that I can do, but I don't know about the things that you do and your talents. But if I can find someone like you that marries up with this problem I've got, I'll pay you to do it. You do it, you'll be better at it than me. It's going to take me years to learn what you know. So why not just pay you to do it?
Well, I remember
do you know what I mean?
6 months ago, you can pay me.
That's the idea. And it's about how a community that needs something, actually pay people to do that work.
Yeah. So there's, skills banks are something that you can work at a very local level, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work. Across geographical areas and across areas of interest.
That's what's actually, they're trying to do that now with this setup of local enterprise partnerships. The Leeds City region covers 11 local authority areas. So these things they're trying to do that anyway.
If they do it in that way that you've described, I will fall off my chair.
I don't know whether they'll do it like that. I've no idea who sort of they are.
It will be a very, very formal procurement method.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between what happens through formal institutions, which have to operate in a certain way, and informal networks. And again, where we're coming from with this is to say, is there scope? Is there an opportunity, is there demand for an informal network to support community action?
I was going to say, it seems that, we're kind of, to some extent, talking around in circles.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course there should be, and, the answer to the question about tendering is, we can tender. I can think of a couple of groups of basically individual consultants who have tendered successfully for contracts. So there's no reason why that can't be done through a network, none whatsoever. It's formal tendering processes, and you've got to, which means you need some expertise, but fun enough, we're here and we're here to help. But the reality of that, so that's part of the thing, I think that would be valuable. I think the thing we've talked about in terms of shared experience and knowledge and what have you, I think critically, if we're talking about a network of a sort of essentially people who are, I hesitant to use the word professional, but at least in part, that sort of thing, are engaged professionally in some kind of way, or have been in that process. And we've got links into some who are just doing it because they love it, and it's a kind of dynamic. But I think that's something. It's a bit like a space, isn't it? In a way, the whole point about a network isn't. If I'm holding a networking event and I get 150 people in a room, I don't direct what they do, which conversations take place, which groups of people go away together and say we'll do that together. I hope that the fact of me facilitating them doing that is the purpose of the network. So it seems to me that's the second thing. Yeah, we'll have a list of what do people do, get your link, because that's important and valuable. Importantly, that will make people join. Secondly, you have to have facilities and what have you, and by all means make sure. So people say, look, I'm looking for a couple of guys or a couple of people to actually work together on doing this. Well, great. It may be paid, it may not be paid, it may just be speculative, but that's what the network's for. It seems about the second thing. And the third one seems to be a knowledge base, which is what you were talking about, which is about saying, there's shitloads of knowledge out there of different things and different experiences and of what's going and what's not going on. And it's important that we have some kind of process, and there's the forum and discussion debate process is there to actually inform us. But I'd like to add one other thing, which has been alluded here, and it's kind of the monster that isn't in the room, really, and which is this whole question about power. And it was alluded to there because it's really very important in turning this. Anyone who knows me will know that I have a certain irritation with the providers of power. But what we need to understand is that if you're going to break down that, you have to have a conversation with those people, and those people aren't necessarily in the golf club or in the Masons Hall. I can tell you, very often they're sat around the meeting room in City Hall, or you know, and they're not necessarily councillors; they are council officers very often. Councillors often feel just as excluded from the process as and from the ability to influence that, as is the case with things. So we need to understand that, and we need to. If part of what the network can do can be help to facilitate access to decision makers, and let's call them that rather than the exercise of the power. Then actually that will be because one of the things that's going to make this work on the ground in terms of change is government getting out of the way.
It's not just government though, is it? It's that local authority.
Well, that's
control.
All that.
I mean, I think I hope there's nobody here from local government that I'm going to offend, but all right, you accept it. Just put your fingers in your ears.
No, that's why I'm here.
I think Darwin would probably, identify those people as having the selfish gene, because they have a, in Kirklees, the chief exec gets 160,000 a year. Well, for me, if you get 160,000 a year, you might just want to keep your money and keep your job, and you're going to keep the status quo as it is.
I know we said we weren't going to get political, but I cannot sit here and hear a government, and I accept £160,000 a shed load of money, but it's a damn sight less than some people are earning. I am not going to have my vision turned from. Yeah. Let's ignore the billions that have been earned and go for the ones who are earning 160,000.
Can I just finish?
Sorry.
What this guy was saying about was where the power was, weren't you? In who makes the decisions. And there might be hundreds of millions of pounds earned elsewhere, but generally those people are earning it from the system and don't really have an influence on what the system looks like. They've just looked at the system and realised that a way of making money in it. And I think you're right. The people that make the decisions and take that power, I think that needs to change, and I think really it is. I think over the next few months that is actually going to change.
I'm going to kind of pull things together in a minute. I know there's three of you who want to make a comment, so you're going to get a chance. But that's going to be it, just because of time. One thing that I would say before you will make your comments is, power exists in a whole lot of different institutions and structures, and in a lot of closed networks. And what this is about, if it's going to be successful at all, it's got to be about creating open networks where people are not having power over each other, but they're actually sharing skills, experience, information in ways that help each other. And the only power in any network that we create is the power of cooperation. And local government is an important part of that, as is business, as is people who work professionally with communities, as is people who work independently as community activists and punters. And from my point of view, and I think from the point of view of CGX and the others who've been involved in setting this forum up. You're all welcome and you've all got a part to play, and it's not about pitching one group of people against another. Okay, so the last 3 points, and then we'll wind up.
I think the informality of a network doesn't matter. People come and go. Sometimes people are taking part without contributing anything by reading what's there. I think one of the measures of success should be, are there people who are telling stories to the world that otherwise would not be heard about? Things that are happening at the very micro-community level, which could be in danger of being walked over if people aren't aware that things are already happening. But also as a kind of quick global response, like the library's response that happened on Sunday, where one person tweeted, libraries are important because, and it sort of went right round the world, and it then has been on Question Time, on national news, everywhere, all this week. Many people, perhaps at decision-making level, not aware of the vast range of services that are going on in libraries, that people who otherwise don't have a voice are gaining from and would lose if the libraries were closed. So I think you can get networked out indeed, but you can also be searching for something very specific, and a good network with a body of authoritative knowledge can be useful even for people visiting it just once in answer to a specific question.
Okay, thanks. And then...
Community action is quite a nebulous term, and I can see possibilities for people whose idea of community action is like local residents campaigning against business interests that they're trying to favour in that area, or it might be business communities campaigning against local government control, or it might be local government workers campaigning against cuts imposed by big government. And I'm wondering whether it's possible to have a network that supports all of those different people, because there is a very different idea about the kind of community action that we want to be taking, and who we're taking it with, and who we're taking it against, or where we're taking it.
Okay, I think that's a good point, and I think this is part of the process of trying to identify where that commonality of interest lies, clearly that conversation needs to keep going on. But I think you'll find that there are some areas where there's already a kind of coalescing of ideas, as well as a contrast of ideas in others.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back very quickly to the discussion about power we had before, and I think it's just important to say, I guess a lot of people might not realise it, but there's a lot of power in this room, in the sense that a lot of people here will be very active in community organisations and perhaps community leaders themselves who have power, people trust them, they have the power to make things happen. And I think if more and more public services are going to be possibly provided by community groups, the certain people active in communities can gain even more power. And I think we need to be aware of that, because before you start bashing sort of local authorities and councillors, at least they're democratically elected to start with, where a lot of community power, some people gain power very quickly and hold a lot of power, and there perhaps hasn't been a clear process there of how that's gained, and power can become very quickly entrenched. So I just think there needs to be a bit of awareness of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that the whole conversation about a big society has opened up, which, whatever you think of the big society idea as presented by government, it has started to open up this debate about what kind of society do we want to live in, and what do we want both from ourselves, from those who provide public services for us, from our elected representatives, from business, and from others. And that's a really important conversation, which in many ways had been captured just by those who were quite close to political power in the past. And I think opening that up is going to be quite significant. What part we play in that, I think, is something that we are going to need to keep discussing among ourselves keep building on the basis of the things that we are interested in, the things that inspire us, and the things that we want to do. Because no one is going to get out of bed for the things they don't want to do. So really, in terms of taking our society forward, what we'd like is your views on what would you like to do next, and also your opinions on what you make of tonight, good, bad or indifferent, just your thoughts. And what we're going to do, because we've run out of time really, is we've got blue post-it notes and green post-it notes. And if on the blue ones you can say one thing that you would like to do next, if anything, and you're allowed to say nothing, or just not do anything. And on the green ones, just one comment you're feeling about tonight, or a reaction to tonight, or a thought about tonight. Because that will just help us in terms of gauging the kind of feeling in this room, and maybe thinking about how our society should be taken forward as a forum and a network. Okay, so if you can just pass these quickly around.